I saw it at a preview screening in a big theater in Boston, and it was packed because it was a big media event, a lot of people there. And my memory is that none of us knew very much about the film in advance. There hadn't been a lot of talk about it. We knew it was about the Vietnam War, but I don't think I knew more than that, and I don't think most people did. And there was a very strange feeling in the theater as the film progressed, because you felt you were getting deeper and deeper into this Pennsylvania industrial location and these people and the wedding. And it was beautifully done and it was full of interest, but it was going on and on. And I thought this was a Vietnam film. When are we going to get there, And then, of course, suddenly the film puts you there, and not just there with any introduction. There's no kind of preparation for what Vietnam's going to be like. The characters, your characters, the ones you've been following and really become involved with, are suddenly in a terribly dangerous, difficult situation. And you could feel in the theater the jolt with that transition and the sudden sense of danger. And, this would have been an audience where probably quite a number of the people had had an involvement in Vietnam. And by the time it was clear what kind of situation our characters were in and how perilous it was, before the Russian roulette, just in the terms of the way in which they were imprisoned in a life and death situation, there were people in the audience crying out, men, above all men, crying out in sort of helpless anguish and anger and pain. It was a mixture, and you felt, and this was a prediction of what was going to happen with the film altogether, you felt that there were conflicting opinions, that some people were sort of saying, yes, that's how it was, and it was terrible, and I am hurt in seeing it and identifying with it, whereas others were saying, no, it was not like that. There's something false in the picture. And by the time the film ended, I don't know that I've been to many screenings where there was more going on in the audience. Sort of tension, but real dispute. But underneath it all, a feeling of having been profoundly moved and shaken. The transition, that jolt I talk about, from the relatively peaceful Pennsylvania scenes to Vietnam, is still, I think, one of the most savage juxtapositions in film construction. And it was at that point that you felt the film had grabbed you and thrown you into the cockpit, and that you was as exposed to the danger. And I still remember that feeling, and it was repeated when the film opened. Audiences that came in great numbers in America were almost fighting each other over the film. So it was a big event as a screening, and people poured out of the screening, and there were fierce arguments going on the sidewalks afterwards about what the film had done, what it said, what it meant, what it got wrong, or all those things. There was a lot of anger attached to it, and some of the anger was, God, they put us through that, i.e. Vietnam, and some of the rest was, no, this is not what really happened in Vietnam. And it was, you look back on it, and it was a fascinating portrait of the way America was trying to come to terms with that war. I was probably as mystified as anyone up to, I don't know, it's beyond the hour point, I think. And I felt, is this really a film about Russian Orthodox weddings in the Pennsylvania hinterland? I knew there was something else coming. And when it came, I thought it was devastating. And I've always thought it's a great film. I think there's a lot to be said against it, but that doesn't disqualify it from me from being a great film. I don't think it's really, in the end, about Vietnam. I think it's about the terrible burden of American manhood. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd seen Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and I knew who Cimino was, broadly speaking. I guess I knew who the actors were. I don't think any of the no, certainly none of the actors were new, and they were all, it seemed to me, admirable actors. I mean, John Cazale was, I thought, a great actor, and he'd done his great work, and Streep was beginning, but Streep was known, and no, they were all known, and I think I regarded the cast as a very, very promising lineup of people. I thought it didn't guarantee a good film, but it guaranteed an interesting film with those people in it. You know. My impression was, looking back on it, that one didn't know very much about how the film had come into being, and later, as the film got out there and people were talking about it more, it became clear that the gestation had been as violent and troubled as the film itself, and that it had been through enormous changes, and there were quite quickly rumors and stories going around about other writers, uncredited writers, who had been involved with it, and about the possibility that at different times along the way it had been a completely different movie, that really the Russian roulette trigger had been what prompted the film, and it might have been a gangster film. And I knew one writer who claimed that he had actually written a script, or maybe he had doctored a script that was a gangster film. So there was confusion there, and it clearly was, it was a movie which, and I felt this at the time, I felt almost as if Cimino had fallen in love with the Pennsylvania part of the movie, the wedding, and got really lost in it, caught up in it, and loved the footage so much that he didn't feel he could abandon it. And then someone had kicked him and said, "Get to Vietnam fast, don't mess around." And almost that's how the film had been constructed. Now, if you look back on it, the whole, I think, works very well. It's in two grand parts, well, three really, but the long first acts, shorter second, shorter third, but the juxtaposition of those parts, I think, works very well. But I can easily believe that in the making, it was chaotic, you know. It feels like that. A lot of the energy that's in the film, I think, comes from the chaos. And I think, looking back again, I think that was almost part of Cimino's strength as a director. I think Heaven's Gate has the same sort of thing in it. I think he almost made it up as he went along. And when you're doing it at that budgetary level, you're in hell. And you're probably not going to last too long, as he didn't. But I think that's the way he operated. It's a film about working class people. And there are not too many American films that really are about working class people. And it presented the place and the level of life there without much glamour. There was the glamour of them being movie stars. I mean, De Niro, Walken, and Streep all had then not just their own youthful beauty, but they had that sheen of glamour that comes from people that you are ready to call or learning to call movie stars. So they were not working class in that sense, but the people they were portraying, pretending to be, were working class. And the relationship, say, between the Streep character and her father, which arguably could have been cut from the film, in that it's a sort of distraction from the main story. And I dare say there were pressures that said, get that out of there. But for me, it's a vital part of the film because it really says something important about the grim quality of life these people are leading in this town, and how when they go to war to fight, when they try to sort of stand up for America the Beautiful, it's hard to know what they think is beautiful about America, and because this is a grim life they're leading. No more or less grim than the life most Americans lead. But that is not often presented on the American movie screen. And here it was, and I think it was quite startling. And as it went on, as, let's say, 15 minutes of it became 30 or 40 minutes, you did feel this is remarkable, you know, and you did wonder where it was going. But I felt all of that was a justified risk and paid off. And I think in the history of the film commercially, it clearly did pay off for people. It was very evident to an American audience that the terrain they go to on a relatively short drive to hunt deer is impossibly remote from where the film had been set. In other words, there is a leap in that journey. They go to an imagined place. They go to a mythical place, which is a version of the classic frontier. It's a wild, natural, rugged place where humans may confront animals, wildlife, and they may conquer it. And, you know, this is getting back into primordial values attached to the frontier in the American imagination. And it's very much, for me, I remember feeling, oh, here has been a wedding, and a wedding at a level of life in America, working class life, fairly religious working class life, where the wedding naturally in a narrative would be followed by a honeymoon or a kind of a sexual fulfillment. We don't get that. Women do not play a major part in this story. We get a scene where men go to vindicate themselves and their prowess and their honor, and the target, the object of that, and it's a nearly religious object, is to bring home a deer's head. And you know, the title of the film tells you that quest, almost an Arthurian quest, the intensity of it and the mythic force is really what the film is about. It's about men proving to themselves what men are, with scant respect for a social setting in which women might have an equal place, or a place. Again, the juxtaposition, the way you go from the wedding and the rather cramped interiors to this enormously expansive, beautiful setting. It's as if, to put it very crudely, it's as if Willy Loman, or a character like that, had become the ultimate Hemingway-esque character going out to prove himself. You know, this is a film made at really the height of De Niro's screen career, I think. He's still with us. He works on and on and on, more than I would wish him to work. But I think that in the 60s and the 70s, De Niro, not in every film he made, but in many of the films he made, you felt he was taking an enormous existential risk with himself, and you felt you were getting into the intensity of his being and his own confusions and turmoil in ways I don't think he could begin to explain. But he was a very compelling actor, one of the last truly compelling male figures on the screen, and you know, that held it in place. Walken was more playful, he was funnier, he was more elegant, he was more beautiful in a lot of ways. He moved fabulously. The scene in the bar where they sing "I Love You, Baby." There's a sort of rapturous scene about male companionship, a really great scene. Um, and Streep, I think it was the first time I felt certain that Streep was a great actress, because her part is barely written. If you were to look at the script, I don't think you'd find very much, and I dare say she added a lot to the script just by pressure of personality. But she does so much in the way she looks at people and just waits and reacts and responds that I felt that she, a thing I had not felt before, that she really was a great actress. And there is a developing inarticulate relationship between her character and De Niro's, which is never really spelled out, but you just feel it, and it's in the force of the acting, and beyond that, I don't think there was a performance that was out of key. I mean, almost everyone in the film is memorable. There's a Green Beret sergeant, I think it is, in the bar, who just appears very briefly, and he hardly says a word, but he's just piercingly memorable, and almost everyone is like that, I think, you know. No, the performances were outstanding, and you know, as it is often the case in a movie, when you're a little uncertain where it's going, you depend on the energy of the performances. You go with that, and for me, that was a very big part of the film, which culminates in the second half, where they're all put under much more stress. I do believe that the initial impulse of the film, the germ that prompted it, and probably that held it together commercially through very difficult times, was the Russian roulette. The idea that you would film sequences where a character was holding a gun to his head, and you did not know whether he would kill himself or not, and he didn't know, and that there was an enormous dramatic tension inherent in that situation. And so it proved. I mean, the Russian roulette sequences are desperate, and the feeling of affection and helplessness and desperation and tragedy between De Niro and Walken as it climaxes is the climax of the film, and it's amazing. It's overpowering. I mean, that was a moment where people were crying out in the audience, and I think people felt they were there. People felt they were there around that table, and Cimino just handled it, or the actors handled it beautifully. Now, beyond that, the Russian roulette sequence was iconic in that it was the central focus of the complaints about the film, because there were people right from the start. I remember this being talked about on the sidewalk outside the theater. People saying the Vietnamese didn't do that. I don't think at that stage people were totally sure how the Vietnamese had behaved. The Vietnamese, in certain American eyes at that time, were heroic figures, heroic and tragic figures. They were the abused people, which is historically unquestionably true. But people said, no, the Vietnamese didn't use Russian roulette like that. It's a dramatic device that has been imposed on the film, as it is, without question. It's like the transition to the mountains where the deer live. It's something that is there for Cimino's overall imaginative purpose. And you can complain about it, and many people did, because there was still bitter complaint about the Vietnam War, about why it had been fought, how it had been fought, what it revealed about American stupidity, and also because there were people in the audience who were probably wounded veterans from that war, you know, physically and mentally. And the mental wounds of that war were often greater than the physical wounds. So the Russian roulette sequence became, and probably still is in a way, the most talked about part of the film. But I give Cimino credit and honor for using it and seeing it as a dramatic device in a film that ultimately, I think, is about the notion of American male supremacy, the terror that some American men may have in feeling that the theory is a farce and a fraud, so that if you can't shoot a deer, you may end up shooting someone else or yourself. And you know, the deer hunter now is an historic landmark. In the decades since, Americans have started to shoot each other, and particularly people in schools, with a vengeance. And it's a terrifying thing to behold and to be part of in America. And I think that it's easier now to see how Cimino was prescient in seeing how really the role of the gun in American life, the thing that makes a man a deer hunter, is what the film is about. And that in a way Vietnam was just a weapons exercise for America. And I don't think that's far-fetched. I think culturally, in the imagination, Vietnam was a moment where America wanted to prove its prowess, and the degree to which it failed in that attempt was not just tragic for the people damaged in it, but is an indicator of a terrible decline in American confidence that has set in and which is only increasing as we speak. I think it's a great film. I understand and respect the arguments made against it, and the arguments that it is not an accurate picture of the Vietnam War. But I would say in reply, I'm not sure that War and Peace really tells you too much about the Napoleonic War. I think it sort of has the idea that the Napoleonic War is in the past. We have to bury it, let it die. But that we need to know more about what war means to people. I think in both The Deer Hunter and Heaven's Gate, Cimino knew that he was making epics about American men, violence, and guns, and how that was all going to work out in our destiny. And again, I would say that I think he was quite prescient in that he anticipated the degree to which America is now in torture over what to do with guns, with this absurd Second Amendment, which is cheated and distorted legally and doesn't really mean what they claim it means. And the plain common sense fact that if a country as turbulent as America has as many guns, they're going to be turned on Americans. You know, America is a fully armed country, ready for civil war. And I think Cimino, I'm not sure that he could have spelled it out, but I think he understood it in his heart, and I think that's a big part of the imaginative energy that goes to the two great films he made.